All right, so we are at the second sign that Jesus performs in the book of John, and this is one of those passages that's going to be easier for us to actually walk through verse by verse. John and all of the gospel writers are storytellers first and foremost, and so they are building these stories up with tension and with a certain plot and an arc in mind, and sometimes it's nice to just experience that. So that's what we're going to do and kind of talk about certain things along the way. Though just a heads up, please follow along in your bulletin. If you'd like, we'll also have it on the screen. This morning, I realized when I put the slides together, I used the wrong translation, or at least a different one. So my apologies. You'll notice that it's different, but I think we'll survive. John chapter 4, it starts with, after the 2 days he departed, after the 2 days, Jesus departed for Galilee. For Jesus himself had testified that a prophet has no honor in his own hometown. So when he came to Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him, having seen all that he had done in Jerusalem at the feast, for they too had gone to the feast. Now, the translation that you heard read and is printed gives you a help. Because you might be wondering what feast. And that feast was Passover. Jesus had been in Jerusalem at Passover. Passover is what's called a pilgrimage festival, where if you are able, you would want to celebrate it in Jerusalem, the holy city. So around Passover and other pilgrimage festivals, you would see the population of Jerusalem swell to about 200,000 to 300,000 of your closest friends and family, and it would just burst at the seams. And apparently, it was an incredible experience. And Passover is probably the holiest day in the Jewish year because it is the festival where they celebrate and in a lot of ways reenact the fact that their ancestors were slaves in Egypt and God rescued them from that slavery. Like, this is the big moment where God acts in the Hebrew Bible. God, his people, the children of Abraham, are enslaved. He frees them, and then he brings them to Mount Sinai, and he gives them his teaching or his Torah. Sometimes we translate it the law. And this is when the people of Israel become a nation. Like God gives birth or fathers a nation he calls Israel. So this is where they come together. This is where their identity is rooted. It's a really big deal. And so Jesus, as a good observant Jew from Galilee, travels down with thousands and thousands of family and friends, and they observe it. And while he was there, you can read about this in John chapter 3, 2 and 3. While he was there, he teaches, he does some other stuff, and apparently he performs miracles. So after the Passover is celebrated, everybody returns. But Jesus and his disciples take an odd route. Instead of going around the country of Samaria, he goes right through it. And that would be weird because Jewish people and Samaritans do not get along. In fact, they hate each other so much, it occasionally turn to violence. And there's a long kind of historical reason for that, which we won't get into. But as Jesus and his disciples are traveling through this, hostile territory, some people actually buy into what Jesus is selling. Namely, that God is now here. God is no longer to be worshipped as present in a temple made by human hands, but God is here and now. He is acting. He is doing what he promised he would do. His Messiah is here. The very presence of God is here. And the Samaritans buy into this. And so he and his disciples spend a few days ministering to them, teaching them. I'd love to know what he taught them. And then they make their way back to Galilee. And as he's coming to Galilee, there's a buzz going around. Because they remember, oh man, that guy, he's a Galilean. Jesus, he's a Galilean. He probably has a Galilean accent. Dude, I saw him do that in Jerusalem. He did this. And he performed this miracle. He healed this guy or something. And now he's coming back. So there's this, it's like the world's first viral marketing campaign or something. And he's coming, and so people are going to want to see him. So he came to Cana in Galilee, where he had made the water wine. That's his first miracle. He turns water into wine. And considering the response he's getting now, I think it's safe to assume if you turn large amounts of water into wine, you will be very popular. And if you don't know why, just ask your neighbor. And so there's this hubbub, there's this buzz going around. Oh man, that guy, yeah, apparently he makes good wine too. And so this official finds out. It says, and at Capernaum there was an official whose son was ill. We don't know who this official was. In Greek, it's basilikos. I think your translation says royal official. That's probably pretty close. We just don't know who he was. And in some cases, it doesn't matter. But it's worth considering who he might have been. And he was most likely, scholars tend to agree, that he was not Jewish. He would have been Roman, probably, appointed by some kind of Roman governing body. Because he's in Galilee, he probably works in conjunction with Herod, King Herod of that area. That is not King Herod the Great, who was in power when Jesus was born. It's one of his sons. But as it turns out, we know from history, if you are a Herod, you've got power, you're some kind of like king or something like that, or prince, and you are what we call a terrible person. The Herods were awful. This guy, this Herod, his father actually murdered one of his sons because his son was way more capable than him politically, and so he got nervous. So if you think your family's messed up, I've got good news. It wasn't that bad. So you've got this Roman official working possibly in the palace of Herod. He's not Jewish. He's not a God-fearer, most likely. And he works with Herod, which means he's probably into some shady business. So, however, his son is sick. And when this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, again, there's some buzz going around, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So regardless of what he may or may not believe or think about Jesus, he's got a chance. His son is dying. You're going to do whatever you can. So he approaches Jesus. And here Jesus responds in a very un-Jesus way. He says, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. So imagine that. You come to him, your son is dying. And there's a guy, he is known for performing miracles, and you say, come and heal my son. He says, yeah, unless you see signs and wonders, you'll never believe. It's like, I don't think you heard me. Imagine going to like your doctor. You've got pneumonia, and you are sick, you are exhausted, you can't breathe, you're hacking and coughing, and you go to his office, and you explain what's going on, and the first thing he says is, I really feel like whenever we get together, you just want something from me. It's like, yeah? I thought that's how this works. Now, there's a little bit of a translation issue here. Your translation printed kind of adds a word to help make it a little more clear. This just says, unless you see signs. Your translation says, unless you people. Now, it's you in Greek, but plural. So I don't know why the translators didn't just use the word y'all, because that's accurate. We need that word in the English language. I commend y'all to you. So unless y'all see signs and wonders, so he's talking not just to this guy, but evidently the crowd around him, then you will not believe. And the official says to him, sir, come down before my child dies. So why would Jesus respond like this? Well, as it turns out, there were other healers, miracle workers of that type in the ancient world. There were Greco-Roman, Greeks and Roman types that were more like pagan miracle workers. They would do some kind of healing stuff, but you get the sense that it was more like psychosomatic. Situations where things are more in people's heads, and if you have a really strong power of suggestion, sometimes you can kind of knock people out of that thinking. That's kind of my take on that. But then within the Jewish world, there were also miracle workers, healers and that type. And my sense in that case, from what I wouldn't say little, but what I do know about it, which isn't a ton, is that these were men of profound prayer who God answered. Like there are some people who are powerful in prayer and they just have this gift and it is God acting and God answering their prayer, and it just is what it is. And I think what Jesus is pushing back on here is the fact that these healing events, these miraculous signs and wonders, they are good, but these kind of spiritual experiences can be addictive. Addictive in the bad sense. I mean, if you think of like a substance or an experience that's addictive, you consume it, but then you want more. Like no junkie shoots up heroin and then decides, well, that was fun. I'm going to go find something else to do now. No, you're already thinking about your next fix. No, like serious alcoholic can just have 2 drinks and say, well, that was nice. There goes my evening. I'm just going to go to bed. No, and I've seen this before, and it's kind of sad to see, and it's exhausting, to be honest, where you witness this miraculous sign, like maybe God really works in your life or in those around you, and you're left kind of needing more and more of that experience to the point that your faith is based on that. And that's a dangerous situation because there will always be times in our lives where God is either quiet or silent. And if you've been a person who's followed Jesus for a while, these times just happen. They happen in the Bible regularly. And if your faith is kind of based on that, and you're always just looking for the next big spiritual experience or thing, when God goes silent, your faith is in danger of kind of crumbling. It's going to be a moment of crisis. And realistically, Jesus is not here to be a miracle worker. He's here to do something else. And although these signs and wonders legitimate, they prove that God is really active with what Jesus is doing, that's not really his purpose. And we'll get to that in a second. So Jesus says to this guy, "Go, your son will live." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. And I really like the way your translation put it, like he took him at his word. He says this, and then he says, "Go." And let's see here. As he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. So he asked them the hour when he began to get better, and they said to him, "Yesterday, at the 7th hour, the fever left him." It's about 1 o'clock. The father knew that that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live," and he himself believed, and all his household. This was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. Now, this is remarkable, because in all of kind of the Jewish faith healer or Jewish healers, there weren't a ton of them, these men of great prayer. As far as I'm aware of, there is only one guy who at one time, he just did it once, prayed that God would heal somebody who was not immediately there, and God answered that prayer. His name was Hanina ben Dosa. He prayed for somebody, actually the son of a famous rabbi, who was far away, and God answered that prayer. One time. So you have this official who's, we'll just assume not Jewish, who works for Herod, who just hears that there's this guy who might be able to perform miracles, who says, "Go, your son will live." What is your response going to be? Mine would be, "That's great. Cana's just down the road a bit. Can we just go? Can you come with me? I think I'll feel a lot better about that." Somehow, this guy takes Jesus at his word. Can you do that? I find that very hard. to just take God at his word. And I've been honest about this. I have a hard time trusting God. Because when I want to trust God, I want to trust God for an outcome. I want to trust God with my health under the assumption that God will give me good health. I want to trust God with my finances with the understanding that I will be comfortable and be able to buy nice things every once in a while. I want to trust God with my family with the understanding that I will have the outcome that I am safe and so are they. It's hard to take Jesus at his word. One of the things that we as pastors will do, and hopefully you hear this every week, that God loves you unconditionally. And he demonstrated that by sending his son to die in your place. And he raised his son from the dead and is raising the dead within you. Hopefully you hear that every week. Do we take him at his word? Yeah. But I also have a lot of shame in my life. I made a lot of big mistakes. I have areas in my life where I just keep making mistakes. Areas that I'm really frustrated with myself about. So do I take God at his word? That I am loved unconditionally? I try. It's hard. Or Jesus says that we must love our neighbors as ourselves. And that was a big question back then. Like, well, then who is my neighbor? Somebody actually asked him that. And Jesus tells this brilliant story that kind of turns it back on it and says, it's not who is my neighbor that you should be asking. It's actually who can I be a neighbor to? In other words, everybody's your neighbor. Great. We are to love everybody in Jesus' name. That is taking him at his word. Do we do that? Yeah, we try. It turns out some people are really hard to love. There are some people, it's just, there are people that are different, that are difficult. I mean, as a pastor, at the end of the service, we go out and we greet each other, shake our hands. This is hypothetical. I've never done this, but some people are harder to love, like, let's not make eye contact and maybe they won't bother me or something like that. Like, yeah, have a blessed week. Go that way. Purely hypothetical. I've been saying that like every service, and then right as we get out, my wife texts me, so I'm pulling my phone out, reading that, and people are walking by, and someone's like, oh, are you trying to not make eye contact? It's like, I am so sorry. Whatever. But the reality is, it is hard to take God at his word sometimes. Because for many reasons. Like, we want to say, like, if you are finding yourself in a hard place, we want to say, because it's true, that God redeems all suffering, that God is actively at work in you. If you are following Jesus, if you have been baptized into his family, the Holy Spirit is working to redeem you, to change your heart, to grow you as a disciple, to work through that dark place in your life. But that is so hard to trust. And often we want that miracle, we want that sign or that wonder because it solves our problems. But like I said, that's not what Jesus came to do necessarily. He has something bigger and better in mind than just being like a magician or a miracle worker. See, as you can see on the projector, that John says this was now the second sign that Jesus did. And John, as a writer, is quite brilliant. And he writes in actually a very sophisticated Jewish way. And it's a little hard for us to penetrate because we're removed from that culture. If you've ever found yourself reading the book of John, which of course I recommend, you might have found in some cases, you're going like, there's something I'm supposed to get, but I don't get it. And in this case, in these signs, and I'm going to spoil the end of John for you, John begins his telling of Jesus' life with kind of like a very poetic opening. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was Jesus, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And for a good Jewish reader, you would know that that is bringing up the story of creation. This is how the Bible starts. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And that first chapter is a description of 7 days, like 7 days of creation. So in a weird way, and John writes in a style that makes use of something called remez in Hebrew. It's like he hints at what he's doing in a deeper sense. We should be looking for patterns of 7. And in John's case, Jesus performs 7 signs, 7 miracles. And so if you start with that, that hint that he's going to be going through 7, because this is like about creation, and then there are 7 signs, what happens next, we should be investigating. Because if you've got 7 and it starts with a week, and now you've got 7, that could correspond to 7 days. So then what happens after that? Jesus goes into his grave. These women go to prepare his body after the Sabbath is over, like you do. And John begins that chapter with, on the first day of the new week. So you have 7 signs symbolizing like the old week, the old creation, everything before Jesus was raised from the dead. And now it's a new day in the new week. And it starts in a garden around Jesus' tomb. And Jesus is mistaken for the gardener because this is a new Eden. This is resurrection language. When Jesus walked out of his tomb, he's saying that this is a new day for all of humanity. Our reality changed on that first Easter. That is what Jesus is doing. It's not about the miracles, signs, and wonders. It's that Jesus, as he is bringing this kingdom about, he knows he is going to take on our mortality to the point of his death. The deepest, darkest parts of our hearts are dying with Jesus. And when God raised Jesus from the dead, it fixed not just the things that he fixed with his miracles, but it fixed our hearts. God is raising the dead within us. God's Spirit is alive and at work within us. Which means that when we find ourselves in those big, heavy moments in life, and I'm talking the big things, not like when the angels lose, but like when your marriage is falling apart, you've lost your job and you don't know if you're going to eat. Your kids are making these horrible choices, and it is going to affect them for the rest of their lives. I'm talking those moments. We know that God is at work in 2 ways. One, the final word spoken over our lives is resurrection. That is how our story ends. We will stand before God with our lives unrolled in front of us like a scroll, and we will see, this is taking God at his word, we will see that this thread called redemption has been woven throughout our lives. And God's Spirit is alive and at work within us to more fully take him at his word that this is true. Now, it's true whether we realize it or not. But I think the example of this royal official getting it when he had no reason to get it is actually an encouragement that you're going to be okay. God is at work in your lives. If you think back in the past when you've hit those big, tough moments in your life, you have made it. God has walked with you through it. And we now have the promise, because it is a new day in the new week, that the final word spoken over us is redemption, or is resurrection, because redemption is the thread that weaves our story together. My prayer for us is that, like this official, we will learn to trust God more, to take him at his word, that we will grow as disciples of Jesus, as he works in our hearts, telling our story of redemption. Let's pray.